When you think about Halo, you probably think about Master Chief and his story. He's one of the most recognizable soldiers in gaming, and for good reason. He's stronger, faster, and more resilient than any normal human, equipped with technology that would allow him to survive situations that would kill almost anyone else. He can walk into battlefields that would otherwise feel like something out of a horror game, and somehow come out on the other side. And most importantly, Master Chief was designed to be a near-silent protagonist, allowing players to project themselves into his armor and experience that power fantasy firsthand. You aren't just watching humanity's greatest soldier fight the Covenant for much of Halo, you are that soldier. But that also creates a strange problem with how we experience Halo. Master Chief isn't representative of humanity, he's not representative of us. For every Spartan walking onto a battlefield, there are countless Marines, pilots, technicians, ODSTs, and civilians who don't have genetically enhanced reflexes, energy shielding, or a suit of armor capable of keeping them alive through the impossible. Yet they face many of the same horrifying circumstances. And while Master Chief can make the Covenant, the Flood, and everything else in the galaxy look like obstacles that can eventually be overcome, an ordinary human being doesn't have that luxury. For them, the Halo universe is a much darker place. So today, we're going to be discussing the horrifying reality of being human in the Halo universe, and the horrible fate that awaits those that get caught in its wars. And trust me, it goes beyond the Flood. We'll be pulling from the main Halo games, its spin-offs, and the novels and expanded universe to look at what it's actually like to live through the events we've experienced from behind the visor of a Spartan. So if you're a fan of lore and end up enjoying the video, please remember to leave a like and check out the rest of the channel. But before we begin, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Razer. I was recently sent the Razer Siren V3 Chroma to personally test out and use for this video's narration, and the most helpful feature so far has been its plug-and-play capability. I haven't had to worry about tinkering with filters just to get clean audio, because it already handled everything from the moment I plugged in the USB. Even in a less than perfect recording environment, the built-in AI-powered noise reduction can adapt to your surroundings and reduce background noise. Combined with its supercardioid pickup pattern, it keeps your voice front and center while helping cut down on noise coming from around you. It's also the most beautiful microphone I've had the pleasure of using, with chroma RGB lighting that can react to things like voice level, alerts, or a variety of other presets through Razer Synapse. It's another amazing piece of lighting that I get to have in frame with me now, and it has some really convenient built-in controls, like tapping the microphone to mute instantly or using double and triple taps to control lighting and audio settings without ever having to switch away from whatever you're doing. So if you're looking for a microphone for gaming, streaming, or creating videos, check out the Razer Siren V3 Chroma using the link in the description. And with that, let's get back to the Halo universe. Spartans represent the absolute peak of what humans can create, but ODSTs represent peak human perseverance. Orbital Drop Shock Troopers are an elite special operations force recruited from experienced personnel across the UNSC's military. They're volunteers, and the candidates are already veterans of other military specialties before they even begin ODST selection, involving physical conditioning, obstacle courses, live fire simulations, squad tactics, and exercises designed to replicate the kinds of environments and missions they're expected to survive. The selection process isn't really about turning an average person into an ODST. It's about finding out which already experienced soldiers are capable of becoming one. And that's important, because when we call an ODST a normal human, we shouldn't confuse that with an average human. These are some of the most capable unaugmented soldiers that UNSC has. They're trained to operate in hazardous conditions, perform special operations, and conduct missions where conventional infantry simply isn't enough. Their equipment is specifically designed around those missions, and even their famous methods of deployment are built around putting them exactly where the UNSC needs them, regardless of how terrible that location might be. But despite all that training, ODSTs have the same fundamental problem that every other human in the universe shares. They're fragile. And the ODSTs know that better than anyone else, because for all the training and experience that makes an ODST so capable, none of them makes them invincible. A single mistake, a moment of hesitation, or even a stray shot can end the life of someone who has spent years preparing for combat. The Rookie is a perfect example of this. He survives the Battle of New Mombasa, only to eventually be killed years later by an insurrectionist while investigating a distress signal in Halo New Blood. There's actually a long-standing rivalry between ODSTs and the Spartan 2 program. It wasn't simply because ODSTs were jealous that Spartans were stronger. The resentment had a very specific origin. In 2525, members of 105th Shock Troops Division confronted a 14-year-old John 117, Master Chief. Their sergeant then ordered the 5 of them into the boxing ring. The ODSTs were completely outmatched. 2 were killed and 2 more were seriously injured, while John was essentially left without punishment. Major Antonio Silva, who had been responsible for those men, claimed that those who invented John orchestrated this incident in order to test the Spartans' augmentations. This incident quickly blossomed into a major resentment for the entire Spartan program throughout the Marine Corps. That attitude became part of the ODST culture. Even Edward Buck, the commanding officer of Alpha 9, would later admit that he once viewed the Spartan 2s as glory-hungry bullet catchers. The irony is that the rivalry eventually became much less important once the Human Covenant War actually got serious. Spartans and ODSTs were fighting the same enemy, and when you're fighting for the survival of humanity, it becomes difficult to maintain a grudge against the person who can keep you alive. So even amongst the unaugmented, there are plenty of strong and capable troops, just with less room for mistakes. But let's talk about some of the terrifying fates that these troops were far more likely to fall victim to that showed just how strong their conviction was to go and fight. The first thing an ODST could encounter is something that, by Halo standards, isn't even particularly scary. A grunt, a jackal, maybe a few Covenant soldiers with plasma weapons. But remember what these weapons actually are. A plasma weapon isn't just a futuristic rifle, it's a weapon designed around superheated plasma, capable of burning through flesh and armor. An elite is stronger, faster, and equipped with energy shielding. A brute can physically overpower a human soldier and tear them limb by limb. A hunter is an enormous colony of worms protected by heavy armor, and carrying a weapon that can tear through infantry positions. And then there's even the vehicles. A human soldier can go from fighting infantry to suddenly having a wraith, ghost, banshee, or scarab appear on the battlefield. So that's the issue. The Covenant don't need to deploy some ancient Forerunner superweapon to kill you. Their standard military equipment is already vastly more advanced than what humanity had when the war began. But the battlefield isn't even necessarily the worst thing an ODST could encounter. I mean, so far, beyond the sci-fi capabilities of these weapons, not much is different from what we see in modern day wars. But then there are the enemies that don't simply kill you. The Flood is probably the clearest example. The terrifying thing about the Flood isn't just that it can kill a human, it's that death isn't necessarily the end of what happens to you. An infection form can take control of a human body and turn it into a combat form. Flood doesn't need to respect the boundary between the living and the dead because the body itself becomes a resource. Private First Class Wallace Jenkins is one of the most disturbing examples of this. Jenkins was part of the Marine Force sent to investigate what they believed was a Covenant's weapon cache on Installation 4. Instead, they walked directly into a flood containment facility. When the flood attacked, an infection form latched onto Jenkins and began taking control of his body. Normally, flood infection results in the victim losing themselves as the parasite transforms their body into a combat form. But Jenkins' infection form had been trapped in containment for centuries and was weakened. As a result, he remained alive and partially aware while the flood controlled him. At times, he could regain limited control of his body, but when the flood took over, he could only watch what it was doing. He followed a group of flood to the surface, where they attacked a group of ODST led by First Lieutenant Melissa McKay. Without complete control over his body, he was desperate to end his own life, attempting to get killed while assaulting the lieutenant. The attempt failed, and he was captured by the ODSTs. Major Antonio Silva tried to interrogate him. While being interrogated, the infection form inside Jenkins' body attempted to attack its interrogators by extending a tentacle through Jenkins' hand, snapping the bones and veins. As Jenkins described it, it was living hell. And it gets worse, because his experience wasn't the worst fate the Flood had waiting for a human being. Captain Jacob Keyes was captured and infected because the Flood realized that his mind contained information. Instead of simply turning him into another combat form, the Flood incorporated Keyes into a proto-grave mind aboard the Truth and Reconciliation. Keyes tried to resist by feeding the Flood information that wasn't strategically important, while protecting the information that could lead to humanity's home world. Eventually, however, he was overwhelmed. When John 117 found him, there was little of Captain Keyes left. Chief had to retrieve his neural implants from what had become of him, and even then, the body continued to show signs of life. But the Flood isn't the only thing that can make death seem merciful. The Covenant had technology capable of doing things to prisoners that go far beyond simply killing them. On High Charity, for example, the Prophet of Exquisite Devotion used a chamber designed around manipulating gravity as an interrogation and torture device. Although the victims we know of weren't human, the implications are horrifying for any unfortunate enough to fall into Covenant captivity. The chamber could suddenly increase or decrease gravity, even applying it to selective parts of the body. Victims could have their limbs crushed, their blood overpressurized, or their organs forced upward through their throat. And if you think the Covenant are the only ones capable of doing something like that, Halo has another uncomfortable answer for you: humanity. The UNSC and Oni have repeatedly operated in gray areas of morality because the Human Covenant War forced humanity into desperate decisions. Oni has maintained classified facilities and black sites for research that would never be acceptable under normal circumstances. Ivanov Station, for example, officially housed scientists and contractors studying Forerunner artifacts, but secretly contained an Oni black site where imprisoned scientists and technicians were forced to work on dangerous and ethically questionable research. And then there's the Composer. The Composer is one of the most horrifying pieces of technology in the Halo universe because it doesn't simply kill its victims. It was designed to convert organic consciousness into digital form through a process called sublimation. The Didact originally used the device to turn his Promethean warriors into mechanical soldiers, so they could fight the Flood without risking biological infection. When he needed more soldiers, however, he turned the Composer against entire populations of humans. The physical process is horrific. The Composer's beams can reduce its targets to ash while extracting their minds, and the device can affect enormous numbers of people at once. The Didact eventually used it to harvest the human population of Omega Halo and turn their neural patterns into the basis for hundreds of thousands of Promethean Knights. And these are just some of the horrific fates that can await an individual human. But the Human Covenant War wasn't just a collection of individual tragedies. These were events happening across an entire civilization for nearly 3 decades. Entire colonies were attacked, evacuated, or destroyed, and when the Covenant could no longer capture a human world, they could simply glass it from orbit. For the people living there was no heroic last stand or final mission. There was simply the possibility of escaping before the planet was destroyed, and for millions of people, even that wasn't an option. This is something that's easy to overlook when experiencing the war through Master Chief. Chief can arrive on a dying world, complete his objective, and move on to the next crisis. But for the civilians living there, that world was their home. They had families, jobs, communities, and entire lives built around a place that could be destroyed in a matter of hours. And the people fighting back weren't all Spartans. Marines, pilots, ODSTs, scientists, and countless other personnel had to keep humanity functioning while the Covenant continued advancing. Most weren't trying to save the galaxy, they were trying to evacuate civilians, hold a position long enough for reinforcements to arrive, transport supplies, or simply survive another day. That's the scale of a war that can get lost when we experience Halo primarily through Master Chief. He's fighting the battles that can change the course of history, but millions of ordinary people are fighting a much simpler battle, trying to make it through the day. This is why I think Halo benefits so much from stories that step away from Master Chief. Chief is the ultimate power fantasy of the franchise, representing what humanity created when it needs someone capable of doing the impossible. Master Chief may be humanity's greatest weapon, but he isn't humanity's entire story. He can destroy an enemy command structure, but someone still has to hold the line long enough for him to get there. He can survive situations that would kill an ordinary soldier, but someone else may have to make that sacrifice to give him the opportunity to succeed. That's the part of Halo that I think sometimes gets overlooked. The Marine who knows he's outmatched, but picks up his rifle anyway. The ODST who climbs into a drop pod knowing there's a chance he won't even survive the landing. Or the civilian who has no way of fighting back, but still tries to survive, are interesting precisely because they aren't Spartans. They represent the people who fought through the same war without ever having the advantages that made Master Chief so powerful. And that's why games like Halo 3 ODST, or even Reach on some levels, are so important to the franchise. When you take the Spartan away, you finally see how enormous the Human Covenant War really was. You see the people Chief was fighting for, the soldiers fighting beside him, and the millions who never had the opportunity to become Spartans in the first place. Master Chief represents what humanity can become, but the ODSTs, the Marines, the civilians, they represent what the indomitable human spirit can accomplish. And once again, a huge thanks to Razer for sponsoring today's video. If you're interested in checking out the Razer Siren V3 Chroma, I'll have a link in the description down below. It features 32-bit audio DSP, AI-powered audio processing, a supercardioid condenser capsule, and a tap-to-mute control, so it's designed to make getting clean audio a lot easier without turning your setup into a full recording studio. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more lore and deep dives into the worlds behind the games we play. And if you want to keep up with the channel between videos, you can find me on my other social medias where I post more content, clips, and shorts. You can even find my videos in audio-only format over on Spotify if you prefer to listen on the go. And finally, a huge thanks to all the channel members up on screen. Your support genuinely helps keep me going and makes me excited for every video I produce. Thank you all for watching, and make sure to have a great week. See you later.